Hello and welcome to the Front Row Back Row podcast. I am your host, Dr. Owen Campbell, with Simplified Motion Physical Therapy, or owner of Simplified Motion Physical Therapy in Phoenix, Arizona. And with me, as always, is Dr. Brian Wolf, owner of Evolution PT and Fitness in Connecticut and Long Island. And today, Brian, I'm coming to you for a counseling session.
I know. This is a good one though. This is a good one because everyone will experience what Owen is currently going through, and I tell you what, you experience at every scale. So I'm excited, I haven't. I'm going to tease this now. I have had this happen very recently, so I'll explain my stories too.
It happens at all different levels, from the guy who's starting up out of his car all the way to multi-clinic. So,
Yes.
so the big question I had when Brian and I were talking this week was I was struggling because I had a big client leave, and now I'm in that period where I got to drum up some business, and it's getting hot in Arizona. There's not as many people here. It's noticeably not as many people here. So I am thinking, man, okay, I got to really do some work on my marketing. What do I want to do? So I have the golf niche that is pretty evident on my Instagram page. I have that Clubhead Speed School, but there's no golfers here. They're all, in California or up north or whatever. So the biggest issue I'm looking at is, okay, well, do I start advertising that I also see your grandma after her stroke, or do I also advertise that I see high school basketball players without overcoming my niche, right? I don't want to just put a megaphone on golf, but then if I do that, man, am I throwing away business the other side? So I really want to know how to differentiate myself without completely like kind of slinging the niche the other way, right? And just become like known as the guy who fixes stuff.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think, we've talked a lot about your perfect patient, your perfect avatar, right? And how to do
Mhm.
that. And I think that one of the things, one of the first steps that I would say here is like, this is what Owen's explaining, that every PT will go through is some form of a cold spell at some point, right?
Mhm.
Whether it's like, and there's a difference between cash flow, and there's a difference between the asset growing. Like the business
Mhm.
can grow, but even as a business growing, you still go through cash flow pains, right? Like,
Mhm.
which is like this overcoming of like, I don't have any new patients coming in. I had a bunch of patients leave, right? And I've seen it at every single level, right? And so to kind of share with you, like I just recently experienced this on the fitness side where like we changed some advertising, we had some stuff happen, and all of a sudden, like we went from, and like the last like month, we went from bringing in 3, 4 new fitness members a week, 3, 4, 5 fitness new members a week, into literally all of a sudden, like it was like one a week, then like
Mhm.
one every other week. And I was like, what the heck is going on? So like there's that same process that you're like, oh, what do we do? And I think the
Mhm.
first process of that is realizing, all right, this is just like temporary. This is just a temporary thing. Like, how long do I need to weather the storm for? It's not a big deal. And then more importantly, now that you're over that, I heard this from Alex Hormozy, who I've introduced you to. He said, I've heard him speak on stage. I'm excited. I'm going to hear him speak on stage next month or next week. But one of the things that he said was, he was like, if you think about sadness is a thought process of, I'm in trouble and I don't know how to fix it, and so then you're in trouble. So if you flip your mindset to, I'm in trouble and I just don't know how to fix it, and I just got to go learn the skills to fix it, and then it's not a problem, you won't be sad anymore, right?
Mhm.
Then it just moves into problem solving. And I was like, that's a really like interesting way to look at that. But he's right, right? Like the reality of it is what you're doing is you're like, well, what do I do? I don't know how to do it. Like, and so my this is why we do this podcast, right? Is to help people
Mhm.
just like yourself and just like me when we got to this point. And so I think one is embracing the cold period, be like, okay, this is okay. This is not a big deal. And then two, I think for you, the bigger thing is, I would focus on the niche, right? The golfer still, and still make golf content, but I would still speak to other versions of that avatar. Meaning, I would still, and so the way I describe it is, if I think of a dartboard, and so the perfect patient is the bullseye.
Mhm.
I'm still going to miss the bullseye every once in a while, right? So even with
Mhm.
my marketing message, I'm not going to hit golfers. So what I think would be a mistake is being like, hey, I treat your grandma, I treat your high school basketball player, and like really whipping the mark or like the message around there. But I
Mhm.
think to expand a ring outside of your bullseye is totally fair. So I think to be
Okay.
like we talked about, like, the weekend warriors, or like, think about that avatar. Like, this is why age is so important. This is why, like, activity level, like, do you play for your company softball team or your company basketball team or whatever? Like, those guys are probably going to also be golfers. So like, you're
Mhm.
still not gravitating too much out of your niche. Like, I talk about my main person is like their mid-40s weekend warrior. So like for
Yeah.
us, the adult fitness is that mid-40s weekend warrior. And it's so funny, man. Like when I really draw it back to like what was going on with that the last few weeks, I was
Hmm.
like, a lot of our marketing has gone more towards moms, right? Like that, like his wife. And I'm like, why the heck are we doing that? Like, why don't I just adjust my like our mark? So we're going to adjust our marketing, and I think that's really going to help with some of the problems we're having. So I think it's just identifying like, okay, this is what the issue is. How do we fix it? And then going from there. So I think that's the process I would go. So I think the first step is not losing faith in what you're already doing because you've already proven some success into it.
Yeah.
And you just realize you recognizing like this is a seasonal town, like where I'm at. And so this is what I got to do. So I would focus on the people that still are there that still do play golf because I would say that there's probably something, especially as a one man person right now, like one man
Hmm.
show. Now, what we've done with all of our other physical therapists, and sorry, I know I'm monologuing, but in terms of my physical therapists, I also give them individual niches that they are working on. And so
Hmm.
they're then doing that stuff and expanding. So that's when I would start jumping to like because I interviewed somebody today who's into dancers, and I was like, oh, that's a niche that's awesome. I was like, but we don't really do that. Like I don't do that. And I also don't suggest someone like me building that for her.
Yeah.
She's got to do that because if she leaves, now guess what? I'm stuck with a bunch of dancers that I don't really know what to do with, right? So
Yeah.
it's like, you know what I mean? So it's like you want to basically build around the people, but have the people build their passion project. So like that's a real key process. And I think for you, you can look at your passion project, but I would say it's golfers, and you want to go like one rung outside of that, and say you can even go towards our population of golfers, right? And like
Yeah.
they're probably living in Arizona, so that's
Yeah.
something where I would go.
Well, and that's a good visual too to do the dartboard and then the next ring out, right? Because you're right. There's people are multifaceted. They love golf and they might scroll golf content, but they also might play in a softball league. They might really focus on parenting stuff, So those are some things that can be kind of tangential, but in that same kind of demographic of like 40 to 60-year-old golfers, right? They do other stuff. So that could be ways that you could do it. And of course, yeah, I mean, we're Arizona. We got those psycho golfers that are out there at 6 a.m. in June. I'm one of them that will still very much do it. And for one person who can go across the valley, I might just stay hammer into the niche.
Yeah, man.
Um,
I mean, I love the
so
parenting angle too. I love that parenting
mhm,
angle to talk about because a great example is like right before we jumped on and when we're filming this, full disclosure, I was late for Owen by 10-15 minutes. Why was I late? And I'll explain. Was literally like one of my first clients for fitness. His wife came in, and not to treat it because his daughter was coming in. So like to
mhm,
your point about that dartboard, like he was my first client. He's who I met. He was that golfer, that like mid
yeah,
40s, early 50s golfer in your niche, but then it led to his wife. It led to his daughter, right?
yeah,
Like that's what we talk about before.
and
So it's
that's
it's leading into that niche for that exact reason.
And that's where I know psychologically I have to say, look, I've only been at it for 6, 7 months. I've put in the work of getting to meet people. Now my name is associated with my company. I know I'm farther along. If I was to say where am I better off 6 months ago or now, it has definitely not stayed stagnant, right? But when you're in it, man, it's
Oh, it's so hard. Remember I talked, and so to go back that, remember we do we talk about the gap in the gain? Do we talk about it here yet? We should.
no,
It's a good book to read. So it's by Benjamin Hardy and Dan Sullivan. It's called The Gap in the Gain. And one of the ways they talk about is to your point, you're shooting for an ideal in your head,
mhm,
that top part. And what you're
yeah,
living in is called the gap, which is where you currently are and the ideal
yeah,
versus what you want to be doing in this situation is also, and it's hard, man, it is hard, I promise you. Like I'm still not good at it, so
yeah.
so or I'm working on it. How's that sound?
There you
But
go.
then what you really need to look at is the gain of where you started to where you are now. So again,
Yeah,
if you think about that linearly, if I think about where I started and now where I am, and like constantly keep myself in that. And again, I'm not saying you don't shoot for the ideal and you don't keep working
mhm,
towards the ideal, but your mindset says, but look at the progress I've made, right?
yeah,
Then what it allows you to do is allows you to take you out of that situation that you're in where you're like, I know I've been doing a good job and I know I'm at this place and I know I've improved and I know I've gotten here, but right. And that's it. That's what it does.
yep,
And so ideally that's something that I think is a good book for a lot of people to read, and that especially entrepreneurs, because I think it's like it's a good mindset to at least make sure you're referring back to it times, because you're so right, man. Like, it's so easy. And
Mhm.
trust me, I've been at this, what now? I can't remember, like 7-8 years. And so
Mhm.
there's still times, like I said, there was still that time this a few weeks ago. So it's like, it's not like and then what happens at this stage is now they just happen at bigger swings and bigger scales.
Yeah.
So you want to make sure that you're able to, but not to lose your way, right? It'd be the equivalent of
Yeah.
being like, look at how far we've made it from America to Europe. And then you're like, you're halfway through and you're like, just make a huge right turn. You don't want to be like that. Like, that would be the problem. Like, you don't want to do that.
Yeah.
And you don't want to necessarily double down. You just want to do that rudder correction, right? Like,
Yeah.
just give it a little tappy, right? And just get yourself in the right direction,
Little
right?
tappy tap.
A little tap
Well,
taparoo, give me that golf reference.
that's funny. So, and then going on to that, the other thing that we talked about, this is the title of this podcast is basically to be Owen's counseling session 6 months in. But the other thing is that I went to a networking meeting that I go to every week, BNI, if you're familiar with it. Um, oh yeah, you're familiar. You're in one. Um, and there was a chiropractor and a massage therapist that are in my BNI group. And both of them, when they give their little spiels, basically say they do different versions of PT, but they start from different angles, right? So the chiropractor was talking about what we would call manual therapy or mobilization, right? Manipulation, all that. And but he showed pictures of a TRX strap in his office with some therapy balls and weights, and patients were saying, "Oh yeah, I do some great exercises with them," right? And then the massage therapist picks up and she says, "I do great with manual therapy and massage, and then I do corrective exercise and I work on chronic pain pathways and all this other stuff." And then I'm up there as a therapist, like, I mean, we've been doing all that stuff for a while too. Anyway, physical therapy, that's great, right?
Yeah.
And part of that is because we as a profession, and I'm sure we've talked about this before, aren't great marketers.
Yeah.
And we haven't had to be great marketers. But I think the reason we haven't had to be great marketers is because insurance pays for us, right? We get people to come to us because it's on their insurance plan, where those other professions don't. So my question to Brian was, in the cash space, because I know what we talked about before, insurance is probably one of our biggest levers that we have as a profession, in that we could just say to people, look, the guys who don't want to spend money on us, right? Whereas in chiropractic, manual therapy, massage therapy, maybe they don't. But in the cash space, how do I differentiate myself from those people, right?
Yeah.
And that's what got to the, do I tell them I treat your grandma too? But that's something I'd love for everyone to kind of hear what you had to say about that, because I thought it was pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think a lot of it. I think I was the guy who actually told you to try BNI, because it's also a really great thing for people to
Yep.
do any type of networking, any type of boots on the ground networking. And BNI is one of my favorites just because it's organized. But there's plenty of other
Mhm.
ways to network, as a small business owner and around it locally. But what I would say with this is, yeah, and this is where insurance is very helpful, because it's a lever that you can pull that the other guys can't really, right? So it
Mhm.
just allows you, and I love what Owen said. He goes, "How do I differentiate myself without being a dick?" And I was like, "That's such a great way of like that's the behind the scenes for all of you." And I was like, "That's so," because like every physical therapist who's listening to this podcast is thinking the exact same thing, right? But it's like a lot of it is in that case, I think, is like you want to have your message always be different in those
Mhm.
scenarios, right? Because there's going to be times where, like, what I love is when I change my message, and then I watch, like, I have a chiro and a massage therapist in my group too, and I love when my message gets out there and their message like kind of goes into mine, meaning like, and I'll even get as crazy as like I'll figure out how to be first in the room, right? Like, to get my commercial done, right? Like, I'll start moving around, and so like in that way that I'll say something and then they'll say the same thing. So now they sound like they're almost kind of copying me. But at the same time, like, if say that doesn't happen, right? Is your message should be
Yeah.
different. So one of your messages for your current business is, I can go to people's homes. So if someone,
Mhm.
can't get, and that's a way that you can market to grandma and grandpa. Hey, I
Mhm.
can go to someone's home and give them the convenience of, like, I'm in their house. So like, if someone needs me, if someone can't get to me, or say someone's super busy in between meetings and like ends at 3 o'clock and they need me to be there at 3 o'clock, like, I can do that, right? And I can be there
Mhm.
from 3 to 4. And so I have that ability to have flexibility. So now all of a sudden your message is different than theirs. So it's just a matter of differentiating as much as you possibly can. And look, that's because what's going to happen is ATs, chiros, and PTs, or and MTs are all going to sound very similar, because it's no different of a problem that if you're a PT and I'm into PT and we're right down the road from one another. So
Hmm.
like, what's your mission? How do you constantly be different? What are you doing? Right. So again, like in this scenario, that's why you don't want to leave the niche, because like you could just keep talking about golfers all the time. Like I really work a lot with golfers. I want to keep working with golfers, because when they say that, they're going to
Hmm.
sound weird, because they're going to be like, what are they trying to
Yeah.
copy Owen? Right. Like that's the thing, is you want to just make sure your message is consistent. And then again, I love that that was an analogy on the fly, right? But outside the like the dartboard, like you want to keep it
Hmm.
tight to that, because it
Yeah.
will work. And I think that's where, like with them, is like, if you're not leveraging insurance and can't leverage on that side, and it's not just one, by the way. Like I leverage it on, I tell you, I'll give you a great example of what I did this morning. The chiropractor that I work with is a cool guy, but he does a lot of cool, interesting stuff outside of there. Like he does stuff for like blood work and supplements and testosterone and different things like that. And I was like, Kurt does a lot of that, guys. Like that's something I don't do. Like you should go do that. And so now all of
Hmm.
a sudden, I just like, while also highlighting him, I highlighted a key difference between us in the fact that I'm like, this is what I got. I can do this, this, and this, and this is what he can do is this, and this. And so I
Yep.
control the narrative, right?
Yeah.
And so that's something where you can do that really well. So that's a way to kind of like think about it over time.
Well, and I think being flexible, like you said, is big, and
Yeah,
having that kind of mentality of like, if they zig, I zag, because it's just something you just don't grow up, quote unquote, grow up as a PT, having to think about. You're just like, I don't know, your doctor told you to come here, so hi, I'm your
yeah,
therapist, right? Um, so I'm getting used to it, but it's still it's still one of those situations where I'm like, man, they just said they do my job. How do I say I do my job?
yeah, yeah.
Uh, but
It's
yeah,
it's
so
it's just it's just competition. It's the same thing between Burger King and McDonald's, right? They're
yeah.
similar, but they're different, right? And at the same time, like there's room in the space for more than one, you know? I find it always fascinating that like the massage therapist, when you said the massage therapist was doing exercises, I was like, what's going on there? Like I was like, so it's always interesting. Like it's easy to go in that headspace, but it's also like, and I had a naturopath one of the first times I joined these networking things. I was like, I do dry needling, and she was like, I don't think you should be doing dry needling. And I remember being totally taken aback by that. She's one of my
Yeah.
best referral sources. She's come in as a patient. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So like, what ends up happening is like it's one of those things where you think about it more. Like I like sitting down with them too and be like, how can we help each other synergistically? Like, what are some
Mhm.
differences where we are different? And then that's a
Yeah.
way that you can actually learn about your differences, and then I can harp like that like crazy in those meetings.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and not only just those meetings, but also like in social media, like here's how I'm different, right? Like
Yeah.
that's, and I think right now the big one that mobile PTs need to do, and particularly you, is I can give you the convenience so I can be in your house. Like
Mhm.
you got a meeting at 2 to 3, another one
Yep.
from 4 to 5. I can be there from 3 to 4.
Yep.
And like that,
And
you
that's a
couldn't
huge
do.
selling point.
Oh man, and quite,
People's
quite,
faces light up when I say, "Look, I can be your 3 o'clock." Right? I just
yeah,
show up at your door. Right?
yeah.
So.
And so I think from that perspective, one of the things that I didn't recognize was the value of that when I was
Mhm.
like, I wasn't charging enough for it. Is my like, because then what happened was I went in the clinic, and then I
Mhm.
was like, people were like, well, I loved it when you came to my house, and I was like, well, wait a minute, like the pricing difference should be totally different on that. Like I
Mhm.
should be charging way more for that. And so what
Yeah.
I did was, over time, was I started charging a lot more money for that service, because I honestly, I didn't want to do it anymore. I was like, I want people to come to me. And so
Yeah.
from a scaling perspective, that's just where my business changed. But there's an initial point where I was like, I'll come to you and it's going to cost you this, or you can come here and it's going to cost you this, and it's a little bit less. And they're like, come to me is way better. They'll pay for the
Yeah.
convenience,
They'll
right?
pay for
So
the
it's like,
convenience. Yeah.
so that's the thing I would say, and we kind of talked about this with your businesses, leverage the heck out of that. So I think
Mhm.
that's different than the chiro and the massage therapist, because you're not they're going to talk about, look at all the great equipment we have, and look at all this, and you know what I mean. So that's
Yeah.
the main difference.
Yeah. Well, and that's the big thing. And that's the thing that I took away from all this is just that, in the minutia of the day to day, you'll get frustrated, but really at the end, if you look at the big arc of everything, you're doing fine. You're always
Yeah,
investing. Every day you're investing in your brand, your business, and like mentally, I think we got to the end of
yeah,
our call, and I was like, "Arr," you talked me off the ledge, and I was just like, you know what? I've actually done pretty well in the last six
yeah, man,
months. Like this is going okay. What would I say to somebody who came to me with this myself? I'd be like, dude, look at all the cool stuff you did.
for sure.
So I think really kind of celebrating the wins is a big
That
piece of that.
do
It
do
keeps you mentally grounded.
100%, dude. I said that to Mike yesterday. We were doing something and I was like, "Hey, let's like how about this?" And he was like, "Yeah, man, we're like executing the goals we set forth, right?" Like
Mhm.
cuz it's easy on the day-to-day to get stuck in that rut because
Yeah.
because we're driven individuals, like especially when you have people who like people who listen to this podcast, like I know the people are driven. It's like you're going to have those cold times and that's
Mhm.
okay, right? But make sure that you're celebrating the good times too. And, you know, and like I've tried to stop that with my wife. I've tried to like, hey, let's like cheers to this one real quick. Like that this happened,
Mhm.
right? Because it's so easy to get bogged down by the bad times because you're so used to problem solving all the freaking time. You know, and it's not always putting out fires, but like when you look at the overall arc of something, like I realized that outside of COVID, I was like, yo, I survived COVID. Like not physically,
Yeah. Well, yeah.
like I mean, like in terms of the business, like there's other businesses that didn't make it. Like thank God.
Yeah.
You know what
There's
I
a
mean?
lot of PTs that didn't. Yeah.
There's a lot of that stuff where it's like, okay, like we're doing okay, right? We're making the right
Yeah.
decision. And it just builds your confidence and that you're making the right decisions and then helps you check yourself too. So I think that's the cool part is make sure you're making the celebrations of like, you know, again, looking at that gain on a regular basis is huge for sure.
And on that happy note, we will end it. All right, Brian.
Sounds good. All right, man. Good
All
stuff. Good stuff. Glad to talk
right.
you off the ledge.
I know. I will. I will now keep my car on the road instead of driving it off a cliff. All right.
Exactly. All right. See you, man.
All right. Thank you, man. See you.